I take very seriously the importance of providing to people of Minnesota excellent quality services and support and assistance. And so 3 of the incidents that have been reported in the last week, 10 days have been very distressing to me. The senior care failures is really appalling. And I'm going to set up a task force of people with expertise in this field to work with our agency heads and look at what the situation is, what the failings are, which we should have been on top of well before now, and what some of the remedies could be, either administratively or in legislation next spring, and we will have legislation proposed. Some of the acts that were reported are criminal acts, and I'm at a loss to understand why they aren't reported immediately as criminal acts to law enforcement agencies rather than being taken by the Department of Health and handled internally. Those are the kind of questions I have. I don't have all the answers, but I want Minnesotans to be assured that their loved ones are being properly cared for and protected in those situations. And I also call on the industry, the care industry who house these individuals, as well as others with disabilities and other infirmities, to step forward also. They'll be part of the task force. I want them to take responsibility. These actions that are occurring as reported should be dealt with within the organization, and they shouldn't be tolerated. And we got to change that ethic that people think they can do that and get away with it. It's fundamentally wrong. With regard to MNLARS, I want to apologize to the Minnesotans who have been inconvenienced and set back by the failures of the registration. I just learned this morning about last night when I read it, about the specialized plates, the failure there. Somebody in the department said it was a glitch, and the response was, it's not a glitch, it just doesn't work. And I've been assured the last couple of months that things are basically working, and I want to give credit, that MNLARS has processed properly 1.7 million vehicle registrations and 600,000 title transfers since it was rolled out in July. But it's far from where it needs to be, where it should be. I reviewed the testimony, both Commissioners Doman and Tom Dayton, sorry. Don't get old. And Tom Dayton, and they, I think, just outlined the predicament well. And they're also going to report that with regard to Real ID, where this should be, is ringing, the problems with MNLARS are ringing alarm bells. In terms of the difficulty we have rolling out major systems statewide, and they're in negotiations with a contractor, someone who's provided the Real ID successfully to other states, and will be taking the responsibility working along with our agency personnel to avoid a repeat of these problems. And finally, with regard to sexual harassment, is our employees in the executive branch, legislative, and judicial branches deserve, just as our citizens do, safe and constructive working environments. And obviously, that's failed to be provided in the legislature, and the reports are that it has not been provided consistently in the executive branch. And I've asked Commissioner France to review this. I'm going to ask a small group of senior agency heads to join with him in this review. It will be a very, very quick review, and look at what we need to do differently and better in the state government so that we provide rapid and effective and consistent response to anyone who's encountering these kinds of atrocities. And there's no place for them in the workplace, in government, or anywhere else in Minnesota, and we need to do a better job of standing up for those who are being oppressed. So with that, let's go 1, 2, 3, and anything else. So let's start with the senior care.
Governor, you talked about the task force. What is the task of this task force? What are they going to do?
I want them to review the current situation. There are 85,000. The reported number is 85,000 Minnesotans who are in some form of senior care. 1,800 let's just check the number, 16 or 1,800. Residential senior care facilities have been licensed by the state. I mean, that's a vast number of institutions and facilities and people that is far eclipsed the capacity of the Minnesota Department of Health to investigate every complaint and to take appropriate action. We asked for the legislature for additional funding for this purpose. In the last sessions, it's been provided. They're staffing up, but even without additional increase, I mean, there's just too many incidents that are being now reported through a streamlined reporting system, which is also put in place just a couple of years ago. And we're going to have to figure out how are we going to be more responsive, more immediately responsive to these complaints, and how we're going to determine which ones have validity, and then we're going to have to find a way to be much more efficient and decisive in terms of responding to them. And again, matters that are criminal actions should be referred to law enforcement and treated as criminal actions without any hesitation whatsoever. So those are the parameters of what they'll be looking at.
Governor, are you satisfied with the response of the Republican caucus? You called for the resignation of Dan almost immediately, and so did many Democratic leaders. That hasn't happened on the Republican side. There is an investigation. There's questions about its independence, and they've initiated an HR proceeding. What's your reaction to this difference between the two parties' reactions to that?
I spoke for myself. The Republican caucus will have to speak for itself. I don't know what prompted them to look for an outside review, but I'll stand on what I said, and others will have to explain what they said or what actions they've taken and why.
Governor, Senator Schoen appears ready to quite vigorously defend himself, maintaining his innocence. My question is that possible that he is innocent? What will he need to be, for lack of a better term, sacrificed because of the politics of this issue and how much attention it's gotten by the people of Minnesota?
I'm sorry, what were your words, sacrifice?
Yes, sir.
Well, no one can force him to resign. So, I mean, no one can, quote unquote, sacrifice him. The extent that the allegations are true, and with enough confirmations, it's become increasingly clear, very clear that they are true. The only honorable thing for him to do is to resign. But again, he's elected as a 4-year term. The Senate has procedures in terms of its ethics review and the like, and can follow those next. They get back into session if that's necessary, but. I mean, that's something also to look at, what recourse there is in extreme instances of misbehavior on the part of elected officials, legislators in this case.
Do you believe that this is a widespread problem, not only in the legislature, but in the executive branch?
I think it's a widespread problem in our society. It varies how widespread it is and how pervasive it is and how uncontrolled it is. But I think that's what we're seeing in other spheres as well, whether it be business or theater or whatever else. I mean, it's so the question is how do you set up a framework to deal with it and to respond again efficiently and effectively and decisively and protect the rights, the jobs, and the careers of the people who have the courage to come forward, and also have a greater consistency of consequence throughout state agencies, and that's what we're going to do. There's been since over 20 years of written policy in statute and in state employee relations manuals about the procedures and the like. So they are spelled out, and but they're also somewhat discretionary for each agency, and I think that inconsistency is very problematic. So that's one of the things I'll ask this group, senior cabinet members, to look at.
The legislature says it's about to run out of money. Do you have some concern that because of that, these issues are not going to be adequately addressed before the end of the
They got enough money. That's been clear all along. I mean, I don't know why they're continuing with this kind of obfuscation, except that they took this position and they're not going to back off it. But they got enough money in the LCC for fiscal year 18 and then next year, fiscal 19, to operate until they go back into session. At that point, they can remedy the situation. I just, I don't, other than the fact they're unwilling to admit that they were wrong or that they seriously misled the Supreme Court and the people of Minnesota and are unwilling to own up to that responsibility. I don't know why they continue to portray themselves as financially destitute when they're not. And their own accounting and their own comments previously have attested to that fact. But we are where we are. They continue to want to protract it rather than deal with it themselves. Deal with their own financial affairs within their own capabilities, and none of this litigation or taxpayer expense for doing so would have been necessary.
Governor, can we go back to the allegations of sexual harassment and your perspective on this? You've been around politics and government quite literally practically your entire life. Does this surprise you? Is this something you were aware of? What's your reaction to that, given your perspective?
Well, as I said, I don't think it's limited to politics or to government. I think the question is what are the procedures set up? What are the institutional procedures that are set up to deal with deviant behavior? And how can that be reported in a way that protects if necessary, the identity, but certainly the careers of people who have the courage to come forward? And how is there a consistency of response so that there's a real consequence? And that's what seems to me, by delegating that responsibility to every single agency separately, is something that the evidence shows is lacking in state government. But setting up procedures. I mean, the state's taken this very seriously for years, for decades. I remember going back to Governor Perpich. I mean, there really wasn't anything codified, and there wasn't anything put forth, and the legislature dealt with that, and the executive branch, and through administrations. I mean, there are procedures in place that are defined and the like. And again, the breakdown has been in some of the implementation, maybe again because of the decentralization of the decision making and the procedures. So we got to look at that and see how we can strengthen that, tighten that up, centralize it if necessary. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but we take it very, very seriously, and we're going to take it very, very seriously over the next months.
This is a little bit different place, Governor. As you know, that you've got people who don't actually work here who are accusing lawmakers of sexual harassment, including lobbyists. So you've got people who come in as interns. You've got a whole bunch of different kinds of people, and they say there's no punishment for the harassers because they will not be able to get anything done. They won't get bills passed. They're the ones who are punished.
Well, and I think that's very unjust, and I think that's its own set of injustices that apply to the legislative branch. I mean, we're going to clean up, strengthen our own situation, the executive branch. That's what we're responsible for, and that's what we're going to do. We'll certainly be glad to be a resource to the legislative branch if they request that. I haven't found them much inclined to take any of my suggestions in the last couple of months, but I'm certainly willing to offer whatever expertise we have. They have to deal with the unique features of their situation you just described, and decide how they're going to handle this. So it's ongoing within the legislative branch, so that if and when these situations occur, again, there are very different and clearly defined procedures for dealing with them, and then for the consequences for people who have violated their professional and moral standards.
Along that same line, you mentioned that these regulations and policies were promulgated, in some cases, decades ago. It seems that perhaps we can talk about the broader issue. You have people feeding into this system here who are still, some of them, bringing in this attitude, which has manifested itself here. Do you have any thoughts, as the highest elected official in Minnesota, what perhaps can be done on a broader scale to try to, for lack of a better term, change the culture so that we don't continually have this problem occurring over decade after decade?
Well, again, it's pervasive to varying degrees throughout our society. And it's not, your industry is not immune, and local media institutions are not immune to those, those violations of professional and moral conduct. Again, I don't know how you prevent people from misbehaving, but there should be consequences, swift and consistent consequences, if we're talking about sexual harassment, for doing so. And people should know the consequences, and those consequences should be applied. And, we saw it happen with the warden at Stillwater, who was sanctioned, in my opinion, properly for his violations, and then, some arbitrator, and that's another part of the problem here, arbitrators who stay in business by splitting the babies are going to one side or the other, and made it just what I think was a terrible, terrible decision, and reinstated it. So, I mean, there are all sorts of complicating factors here, but the bottom line is that we need a procedure where people can go and be protected, and where there's going to be consistent adjudication, consistent response.
These allegations
and if people know their consequences, then hopefully that's a deterrent. I think if people think they can get away with it, that just encourages the behavior. And if they see other people doing it and getting away with it, that encourages it further.
These allegations first surfaced a week ago. Do you think it was appropriate to wait a week to talk about this publicly?
I'm sorry, say again?
These allegations first surfaced a week ago. Do you think it took too long for you to come out and speak publicly on this, or?
I was on vacation last week. I was in Santa Cruz, California with my goddaughter and a couple of my closest friends. It's the first week I've been out of the state on vacation in over 2 years.
Governor, do you know if the state of Minnesota has paid claims to women for sexual harassment?
I don't have that information. I don't know.
Governor, off topic here a little bit. Given the vote of the transit union this week, are you worried about a disruption during the Super Bowl, and have you taken any steps to avoid that or otherwise settle that issue?
Well, I'll be in close contact, and my staff has been in close contact on all aspects of the Super Bowl with the Met Council, with the Metro Transit, and all the other aspects of it. I mean, it's not an uncommon bargaining tactic to find a point of maximum vulnerability to raise the specter of a work stoppage, and that's what I think they've selected to do. I hope and believe that it can be resolved. I don't know the details. I don't know where the financial issues are, but that needs to be the objective. I mean, it would be catastrophic if there weren't public transit operating at full force during that entire week, and certainly on Super Bowl day.
Governor, would you like to see the public employee unions make it easier to fire employees in these cases of sexual harassment?
I would like to see that, yes, but I've fought that battle for over 30 years. I fired 2 state auditors when I took office in 1991 for embezzling public funds, which as an auditor is, again, a violation of not only legality but professional and moral ethics. And when both went to arbitration, and one was upheld and the other one, with the same circumstances, was reinstated by the arbitrator, and I appealed that to the Court of Appeals, and they supported the arbitrator by a 2-to-1 vote. More, not so much on the facts, but just on the fact that under Minnesota law, that's a final decision, and the Supreme Court on the same basis upheld the appellate court and the district court decision that the way the system is set up, there's a presumption, it's embedded in PELRA, it's been there for 40 years, people have a right to their job. And it's a presumption, for example, with these nursing home and other healthcare, that they have a right to their license. And the line that's used often is we want to invoke corrective sanctions, not punitive. Well, I have a problem with that, and I do have a problem, and I don't know that it's going to be able to be remedied, certainly not in an election year, because the unions are very adamant about this. But the problem with the public employee protections, and I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I'll stay unbound. They inevitably are put on the line to defend on an individual basis the worst misconduct of certain members. 99.9% of the people in state government are honorable, honest people, and they do their jobs, and they do it legally, and they divest their ability, and then you got a very tiny fraction that either doesn't perform satisfactorily or commits these kinds of misconducts. But that's where the unions are obligated, feel themselves obligated to defend every one of them and to defend them fiercely. And then, as I say, when you start with the presumption that the person is entitled to that job, unless there are severe circumstances that warrant otherwise, it really stacks the deck before it's even started. You have the arbitrator in the decision with the warden. I mean, he was passing judgment on the procedures that the department used, which arguably, in perfect hindsight, were in far from perfect. But on the other hand, I mean, he put the department's procedures on trial rather than the misconduct of this individual. And when you get that kind of pervasive attitude toward these matters, it really makes it difficult to come in and say we're going to do what we think is necessary to uphold the integrity of the government and keep the confidence of people in Minnesota, which is to hold people accountable and responsible. And in extreme cases, such as some of those described, the senior care and also with the sexual harassment, there should be definite consequences, both internally within government, and also in terms of the adjudication outside of government.
Governor, after Senator Gazelka announced that he was going to try to get $3 million from the LCC, he was going to press the LCC to meet and transfer that amount of money. He told me that he thinks that you and he have developed a relationship that is of such a trusting nature that he believed that you would take that request seriously, that you wouldn't think that he's just kidding. Is his confidence misplaced? Since I returned from my vacation, I called Senator Gazelka. He called me last week, and I said I would respond to him, and I haven't yet done so. But I have great respect for him. I think he's a very honest and honorable man, and I take seriously what he says, even though it varies from what I believe are the facts of the situation. The purpose of withholding the funding in the line item veto was to require the legislative leaders to come back and renegotiate some items in that last hours or minutes of the session
that are very destructive to Minnesota. And to give that up, I mean, the only leverage that is available at this point is the leverage of the funding issue. If they have adequate funding, they're, you know, I mean, they say they're not going to come back and negotiate anyway, but if they have adequate funding to get to the beginning of the session, I mean, there's not a whisper of a chance. So, you know, it's part of that strategy. The remedy to this from the very beginning would have been for them to say, sorry, Governor, we have enough money. We have LCC funding for 18, 19. You didn't line item veto that, and we have enough money, and we have the council telling us, which they did, that they have access to that money for these other purposes. And sorry, Governor, we'll see you next February. And we could have and should have avoided all this litigation, all the expense on both sides, and everything else. And the facts are still the facts. And I don't understand. I'd have to ask, you know, Senator Gazelka or others why they keep pounding on the same fallacy that they don't have access to that money when they do. And they've told us themselves in the mediation session that they do, and they believe they do, and the like.
Well, related to that, the legislative auditor, Jim Nobles, issued an affidavit to the court in which he said that the law does not permit the LCC to transfer money that is not all that is obligated. And
he's the legislative auditor. With all respect, you know, he's not a definitive word on this. I mean, I respect Jim Nobles, but they've got everybody weighing in on their side of things. He's not a neutral party on this matter. And again, they told the leaders in the House and the Senate told us in the mediation session that they believed that were told by their counsel that they had the authority, legal authority, to transfer. Our information from my counsel, our counsel here, is the same. They have that authority. Now, if Jim Knowles has a different view, he's certainly entitled to that. But that's not the definitive word on the subject.
Governor, have you attempted to speak directly with Representative Schoen or
No.
Senator Schoen or Representative Cornish?
No.
Are you aware of any other allegations involving any other lawmakers?
I'm not aware of any, no.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Governor, regarding your MNLARS apology, are you anticipating the Senate hearing to bring out some negative, incriminating evidence regarding what the department's been doing? Or
I don't think there's anything incriminating about it. They, you know, again, I mean, you look at the volume, 1.7 million registrations and 600,000 titles that are all 99.9% of which have been handled efficiently and properly. And there are glitches, there are failings in the system that are not criminal offenses. I mean, they're you know, failures of performance that they are well aware of. I mean, that they acknowledge in their testimony that they're working overtime to try to correct, and they made some progress in doing so. They have more progress that they need to make. So, I mean, I think the facts are what they are. No one's you know, trying to hide anything, and they'll disclose that and be held properly to account with questions from legislators. And nobody wants to correct all of this and have it work perfectly more than Commissioner Doman, Commissioner Baden, and myself.
How about the World's Fair? Where do you think we're going to get the go-ahead today?
Well, I don't want to jinx it. Got my fingers and toes crossed. Let's see.
Governor, the last line in the...
They've done a fabulous job. Mark Ritchie and his team and everyone, I mean, to bring it to this point, you know, just from nowhere at the beginning, really, really exceptionally well done, and they should be very proud of how far they've taken this, and hopefully they'll have to carry it forward further. But regardless of the decision, they've really performed extraordinarily well. Well, they keep pushing the time back, and we don't have much influence in Paris, so we just wait and see.
Governor, the last line in the legislature's motion opposing your motion to their motion was that they're telling the court that if all this goes forward, if they go to the next session and they issue a bill, that the risk is that you'll simply line item veto their budget again. Are you indeed contemplating that?
I haven't considered it because we haven't gotten to that point yet. I mean, they could override my veto if it were to occur. But I haven't given that any consideration one way or the other.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.